Shishu Avastha, as I told you, is the most potent because there are the Jnanendriyas, the Pancha Jnanendriyas, the Karmendriyas, Pancha Karmendriyas. Then there are the subtle senses like the mind, intelligence, ego. So none of these are fully developed in a very young child. The mind, the intelligence, and the ego are not there at all. So there is the soul and the chitta, and whatever the child is learning is a direct impression on the soul. Yeah. So therefore, what the child is learning at this stage is of the most important learning that the child gets in its entire lifespan. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. Namaste. My name is Preeti and I am the co-founder of Vidyakshetra. Vidyakshetra is a Gurukul in the outskirts of Bangalore. We started it in 2016 and this was after a felt need that me and my husband Muneet had in the space of education. With the birth of our daughter, we were looking for an option for her schooling. And the schools in India we found were all following a very foreign system, and there was nothing Indian about it. It was driving children towards competitiveness, towards me first, towards individuality, and these were hardly Bharatiya principles. And therefore, we started our research, and it led us to meeting many people and from many scholars, educationists, Gurukulas. We visited many schools too. And finally, we formed our own curriculum, our own thought processes went inside it. We also met our mentor Indutai, who was already by then, she had started the Punaruthan Samsthan, through which she wanted to re-establish what was lost in the education space. And her program of, she has a 60-year vision, and we could learn a lot from her as well. And in 2016, we were just ready, to start Vidyakshetra. So it has been quite a journey, though a short one. It has been a very deep and meaningful journey for us. Today, I would be talking about Shishu Avastha. There are many people who have done a lot of deep research in the past on Shishu Avastha, which is early childhood. And our Taittiriya Upanishad also speaks in depth about Samagra Vikas of a child. Small background into what I'm about to speak. So taking you way back into what is our Bharatiya Samskriti. Our Samskriti, essentially in one liner, if I have to summarize it, is Moksha Pradayini. Everything, it is a beautiful system. It was created by our seers, our rishis, through their anubhutis. Vidvajjan, also supplemented to it. So it is a system wherein just by leading a kind of a life or following a lifestyle, one can be assured of reaching the ultimate goal in life, which is to transcend this human existence and enter the eternal life. So this is the vision of Bharatiya Samskriti. And everything, there were systems set up which towed the line of this vision. And it was all a very beautifully working, intertwined system, wherein there were a couple of systems I can mention. One is the Kutumba Vyavastha, the other one is the Samaja Vyavastha, and then there is the Grama Vyavastha. So each vyavastha was very beautifully cultivated, and this was the very fabric of our society, of our samskriti, of our culture, and um, this ensured that everybody had a space. The roles, responsibilities of each person was well defined, and the systems that I'm speaking about, including the education system, was also merged beautifully into this. And what is the ultimate goal of the education system, or the legal system, or the judiciary system, or the governance system of governance, or production system, consumption, or maintenance, whatever system you pick in a society, everything was well defined, and everything had a guiding principle behind it. So what is that guiding principle? So the guiding principle is that everything has to be interdependent. We have to depend on somebody else, and by doing so, we work together in harmony. And what is it that will guide us? Dharma. Dharma is the guiding barometer. And for example, if there is an individual, so what is his dharma? Swadharma. What is my dharma as a putra, or as a putri, or as a mata? What is my dharma? So way back, when I was a child, I would watch this serial called Chanakya. And in Chanakya, there was one statement which caught my attention and stays with me till date. This is Dharma kya kehta hai? And this, and the kind of people that were portrayed there, and the kind of thought process Chanakya shared with Chandragupta. This all excited me so much. Is there such a system of education? Is there such a teacher today? And I was very, very excited about that. So I learned, that dharma is the guiding principle of any society which has to be vibrant, which has to be an alive society. So this was our Samskriti. And coming to the education system, therefore, the education system also fed into this stream, created a progeny which would then uphold these principles. So therefore, it was Chakriya Vikas. It was a spiral. It was a continuum, and this was working so beautifully well that it invited and attracted the attention of so many foreigners, and they came here, the travelers. There were the Chinese travelers, the Mongols. There were many different kinds of travelers, and they all write in their memoirs about India, and what they saw here, the systems that they saw here, especially the education system. They write about it. What is the system where the guru, he does not take any charge any fees, and the student does menial service. So these were the fundamental principles of the education system. There was the Guru Shishya Parampara. Now, if you look at the Guru Shishya Parampara, there is the Guru, who is the person who knows, the Jnani, and then there is the Shishya. So, what is it that the Guru will do, and what is it that the Shishya will do is very clearly defined. So, the Guru is the one who will give Shikshana, or Shikshan is training. What will he train his disciple to develop? The patrata, or to so that the knowledge transference happens. Education is a transformative process. It's a very beautiful process. If you delve very deeply, it amazes me, how it can all work. Because unless a subject, I teach biology, And I see in the class that unless I have touched the child, the subject has gone deep inside the heart of the child does not understand the subject. This is the very basic principle of learning, that anything that needs to be assimilated, be known by someone, it has to touch the heart. And therefore, the student's role was to touch the heart of the guru. And how did he do that? He did it by through seva. He rendered menial seva, service to the guru, and he also followed his instructions because he was jigyasu. He wanted knowledge, and he knew that this guru could give that to me. Therefore, the guru, he just waited, and it could take 1 year, 2 years, or very long time. The time duration did not matter. What mattered was, is the patra ready? Is the receiver ready? And when was he ready? The telltale signs were that the student had developed enough humility, namrata, to take on the knowledge, and the guru would know that now this student will not exploit what I give to him, will make sadupayog, will put this knowledge to good use, and he will become a contributor, a positive contributor in the society. So that was when the patra was ready, and the knowledge transference happened from the heart of the guru to the heart of the shishya. So we look at the system of education, and Acharya Chanakya has given us the formula. This is the formula which can be applied to education as well as parenting. Now, what is this formula? Lalayet panchavarshani, dashavarshani tadayet, prapte shodashe varshe, putre mitra vadacharet. So, what does this mean? Now, there are 3 stages of childhood. There is the Shishu Avastha. So, this is about 0 to 6 years of age. This is Shishu Avastha. So, Shishu Avastha, what is, according to the Panchakosha Vikas, at Vidyakshetra, we follow a system of education which addresses the holistic needs of the child, Samagra Vikas. So, what is called holistic development of the child, wherein all the koshas are nurtured. So, the Annamaya kosha is in spotlight. So, just like, on the stage, on the Rangamancha, we have players or theatre artists who are all there performing their own roles, but there's a spotlight. Spotlight is falling on one particular person who is probably the lead role at that particular time. So, likewise, all the koshas are developing constantly, all the time. But during the Shishu Avastha, the focus, the spotlight is on the Annamaya kosha, or the physical development of the child. So we can see, the child is growing so fast. In 1 year, right from a very small baby, it grows to a toddler, and so on and so forth. So in the early childhood, we can see that the developmental milestones are achieved. So many developmental milestones are achieved, and the growth is very fast. So this is about the Shishu Avastha. Then the Anandamaya kosha is also very sakriya. What does it mean? Anandamaya kosha is that kosha wherein the soul qualities are developed. So 90% of all the soul qualities of the child are developed during the early childhood, or even before the birth, during the conception time. And I'll talk about the samskaras too a little later. So this is the early childhood, Anandamaya kosha. So Anandamaya kosha is that wherein the soul qualities are developed of the child. Ananda means bliss. So you can look at the child and you can see, you feel happy. Child is happy all the time because it is in Ananda, it is experiencing bliss. and that kosha is developing, which later on seals. It is very difficult then later on. Through spiritual practices, one has to reconnect with one's Anandamaya kosha, because there are layers developed. I'll talk about the layers, what layers are developed, and therefore it becomes much difficult. Therefore, this is a very, very potent phase of life, the early childhood. And the personality, as I told you, 90% of the child's characteristics, personality is developed, is formed during this period of time. Therefore, I joke with the parents who approach us. They say, Preeti Akka, we will bring the child, when should we bring the child? It's very difficult for us to relocate. We are planning to come when the child is probably 8 or 9 year old. And by that time, formal education can start. I say, but what happens before that is very important. And don't miss the boat, because what happens before that is very crucial. And this has become like, what I say is Brahma Vidya. Everybody takes the early childhood very lightly. अरे हम उसको मॉन्टेसरी में भेज देंगे, उसको इधर भेज देंगे, उसको इधर उधर भेज देंगे. Nobody is thinking, what's happening to the child in those places, right? So we should become aware parents. So then Dashavarshani Tadayet. So there is a phase of disciplining. Tadayet doesn't mean, spank the child. No, Tadayet means disciplining the child by being a loving authority, So be that authority who the child listens to, because the child is unaware. The child needs to be molded, and he needs to be taught, what is right and what is convenient, the difference between the two. And remember, his patratva needs to be developed or prepared. So this is the phase when it's pranamaya kosha, the habits are getting formed. So therein the pranamaya system is functioning, is getting nurtured. So we need to look at how do we nurture the pranamaya system. So give it habits, focus on rhythms, and rise with the sun, sleep with the sun. All these things happen during this phase of the child, which is the Balavastha. Pranamaya and Manomaya kosha is also Sakriya. Manomaya kosha is its feelings. Feeling realm is getting nurtured, is developing. So we need to nurture its feeling realm. How do we do that? We have a curriculum, well suited to address its Ichha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, and Jnana Shakti. So when it comes to Ichha Shakti, we address the feeling realm. So how do we do that? By through the rich exposure of Indian kalas. Kalas are a matter of heart. Whatever is a matter of heart, stories, kalas, rich colors, everything, whatever touches the heart. Yeah, so this is the education. And today we have conveniently left it out of theatre. Theatre is one good possibility. So in today's, mainstream education, we don't talk about educating the heart, and therefore we see, that children come out of the schools like robots, robotic. They are made for the industry. Remember, we still follow the Macaulay system, and Macaulay system feeds into the industry. So robotic children are being developed inside these factory systems. So it kills the soul, and prapte shodashi varshe putre mitra vadacharit. What does it mean? It means that when the child is 16, you become the friend, like a friend. You are like a friend to the child. Why? Because the child has developed its individuality. Yeah. So I remember my grandmother, she was married at 14, yeah, and at 16 she had her first child. So she would tell me, when I was 16, I already had your tauji, by that time, there was a system wherein children would assume responsibilities, would assume roles, because their Vivek Shakti by that time is supposed to have developed. Yeah, so once the Vivek Shakti is developed, then they are to be considered like a friend. So till then we guide them, and after that we are their friends. So what Kosha is developing right now, they look for subject matter experts, for example, because their Vijnanamaya Kosha is Sakriya, is very productive. So they are seeking intellectual satisfaction at this stage of life. So these are the three stages: Shishu Avastha, Bal Avastha, and Kishore Avastha. So my focus today is on the Shishu Avastha. So in Shishu Avastha, we'll examine at what is the. I already told you that this is the stage of life which is the most important stage. So who are the contributors to in this stage of life of the child? They are the mother, primarily the mother. We look at the role of the mother and the other family members. We look at what are samskaras and what impact do the samskaras have on the child, and lastly, what is the education during this phase of life for the child. So we'll look at the importance of Shishu Avastha. So Shishu Avastha, as I told you, is the most potent because there are the Jnanendriyas, the Pancha Jnanendriyas, the Karmendriyas, Pancha Karmendriyas. Then there are the subtle senses like the mind, intelligence, ego. So none of these are fully developed in a very young child. There is the soul, the Atma, and then the Chitta. The Chitta is the vessel of all impressions. The deep impressions on the soul are formed on the Chitta. So there is the soul and there is the Chitta, and then the five Jnanendriyas are just developing. What are the Jnanendriyas? The sense of touch, smell, sight, vision. So these are the Jnanendriyas. They are the Jnana means knowledge acquiring senses, and then there are the Pancha Karmendriyas like the limbs, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. All these are the Pancha Karmendriyas through which one does work. We work with our hands. So they're not yet fully developed. A child is not able to use this to its fullest extent. So because they're not developed, and then the mind, the intelligence, and the ego are not there at all. So there is the soul and the chitta, and whatever the child is learning is a direct impression on the soul. Yeah. So therefore, what the child is learning at this stage is of the most important learning that the child gets in its entire lifespan. And therefore, we give a lot of focus. Earlier in the ancient times, till as recently as the 30-40 years ago, till that time, the children were at home, with the mother, because Mata Pratamo Guru, the mother is the creator of this child. Why I tell she's the creator is because when does the child's learning process start? Let's look at that. The child's learning process starts even before the birth. I told you that the soul and the chitta are there, and they come together at the time of conception. So at the time of conception, who who is primarily responsible is the mother. The mother, if we look at the scriptures, during the times of the Devatas, Aditi did Payovrata for 1 year, one long year, and she was praying for good progeny. And then she begot the 12 Adityas, for example. And then, in our current times, we have Jijabai who prayed, who had, who wanted a son who could defeat the Mughals. So she prayed for such a son, and there came Shivaji Maharaj, and therefore she has the power. She can write this code through the vratas, through the name nishta prarthanas, through deep desire. She can get the kind of progeny that she desires. Therefore, she is the creator. In software terminology, she writes the code, and this code is hard coded at the time of conception. Therefore, she has a very vital role to play. I urge all the mothers out there to prepare, prepare your consciousness, make it a prayerful process. When every child, can you imagine what a vibrant society we'll have, what a positive culture we will build when every parent is begetting progeny out of this prayerful mood. Yeah. So, very beautiful society and culture will be created. So, this is the Garbhadan Sanskar, and there are 16 such samskaras, and out of these 16 samskaras, about 9 samskaras happen in the early childhood. Yeah, so that's a large number of samskaras, because the chitta is so ready, is so prepared, and all the samskaras, like the after the Gaurabhadan, there is the Vidyarambha, there is the Pumsavan, Jatakaran. Yeah, so there are different samskaras like this, and they are, except for Vivaha and Antyeshti, most of them happen either during the early childhood or during the period of education of the child, till the child is graduated. Till that time, most of the samskaras, 14 out of 16 samskaras for the child have already been performed. Vivaha and Antyeshti being the ones which the person will undergo at the time of marriage, and Antyeshti is, of course, at the time of death. So, coming back to Shishu Avastha, in Shishu Avastha, we said the mother plays a pivotal role, not just in creating the progeny, but also, she has nurtured the child in her womb for 9 long months. She has prayed for it, she has cared for it, she has nurtured it, provided nutrition for it. At the end of it, she gives birth to the child, and it is said that the birthing process itself is a second life to every mother, and she knows the pains of going through it. But for the child's sake, she goes through this pain very willingly. So, Mata Prathamo Guru, she, through that struggle, she is teaching the child, many different things, and the child is brought into existence by her. So, what is the education? The education cannot be a formal one in this period of time, because Srishti, God has given this child 2 things. One is Antaprerana, which is the child is self-driven and to learn things. And 2 is Jigyasa. Jigyasa is curiosity. So these are 2 elements which it is born with. So when it is born with this, so you'll see, a small child, it goes, it takes something, whatever its eyes fall on it, it picks it up and then it starts beating it, or it puts it in the mouth, or it's exploring, because it's full of curiosity. It wants to know, it's seeing the thing for the first time in its life, so it wants to know. So it's full of curiosity. So what is the role of people around it, to let that curiosity, not to kill that curiosity. Today we have houses made like museums. Yeah, so there are glass artifacts, there are nice things everywhere, and the child is full of curiosity. It's exploring. It takes the glass and there it goes. And then we say, no, don't let the child there, don't let the child here, don't let the child here. The child's We fill the child's life with too many no's. So this is something that I'll talk about. What are the things that we can do, and what are the things that are best avoided um, in the family. So the child is right now in its very primitive phase of life, 0 to 6 years, and as it grows, what does it learn? It learns everything. What is its process of learning? It observes, it learns, it absorbs. Whatever it observes, it absorbs. So everything. So then what is the family doing? What are the husband and wife doing? So today we have fights in the family. It is the harsh reality, and there is the small child. And what is the child going through when the parents are fighting? The child is absorbing this negativity, absorbing all this negative impressions. So we, adults are rational beings. So what is our duty? Our duty is to provide a positive environment for this child. Yeah, so as I when parents come to me and they share their inner heart's concerns. So if you definitely have to fight, reserve it for a later time, or sort out the differences, instead of fighting. So there are ways to seek resolution. So resort to that. Let's provide our child a positive environment. This child. There are so many fertility clinics today. Begetting a child has become something which you need to strive for, and something which was so easy in a bygone era. So therefore, with much prayers, we've begotten this child, and it is our responsibility to give it a very positive environment. So what one is a positive environment, and more than a positive environment, a very sattvika environment needs to be given to the child. So what is sattvika environment? Sattvik, is the environment should be clean. The mother should prepare food with good consciousness. The food needs to be given with love. The child must be fed with love. Everybody around the child needs to shower love on the child. Lalayat panchavarshani. So the child cannot be rebuked for anything. The child cannot be hit, for example. So the child may be pushing your buttons. You may have too many other inconveniences, but it's not the child's concern. So we have to, as adults, we have to be very guarded about and careful about these mistakes that we do. So why is all this needed? We need to raise the formula is the child has to have a happy childhood experience. So only a happy child is a positive contributor in the society later on. Otherwise, unhappy childhood memories drive one to be bogged down with one's own worries in life. He's not a positive contributor any longer, because to heal from these negative impressions that the child has accumulated becomes the goal of his life. So he cannot be a positive contributor. So our goal is to create a happy child, and everybody around the child must strive. That is, the family, must strive to take care that there is a sattvika environment. What else constitutes sattvika? That there has to be a rhythm in the family. Everybody needs to wake up at a certain time. Wake up before the sun. That is the best, and have the sampradayas, perform the rituals of the family. The child is watching. Tomorrow you cannot suddenly tell the child, hey, you're not coming and attending the festival, you're not coming and praying, you're not touching the feet of the elders, because the child needs to see it, in its formative years. And once we start doing it ourselves, that is when the child will follow it. So, the sampradayas, the traditional practices, and there has to be rich exposure to our culture. Yeah, the feeling realm of the child too is developing. So the child must be exposed. There must be Geet, Sangeet, Natya, Nritya, Vadya, all these things in the environment of the child. And that becomes, the child's nurturing of its feeling realm also. So there has to be stories, bedtime stories, stories from our Upanishads, stories from the Panchatantra. We have so many stories, grandmother's stories. So I remember, in my childhood, my father told us stories from the Mahabharata, and I would tell him, ask him, Papa, how come you know so many stories from the Mahabharata? And he would tell me that he lived in a family of 150 people, under one roof, and he had so many people to tell stories. There were so many grandmothers, so many sisters, so many elders who would take turns to tell them stories every evening, because those were the times when there was no electricity, and one would wind up one's day's work with the sunset, and then everybody would wash their legs and hands and pray to the god, and then it would be time for stories. So my father's heard so many stories. He can recount so many stories, and he naturally told us stories. So we have to fill our children with all these rich stories, from our itihasas. So stories also need to be a part of the child's life. So don't, I tell the parents, don't immerse yourself into the cell phone. This is not what the child wants to learn, has to learn. The child, you cannot be multitasking. You cannot be thinking that the child is there, I'm just, ha, ha, sun raha hu. This is not what we need to give the child, because remember, the child is learning this. Yeah, we don't want the child to emulate us, then we better keep the cell phone aside and give it undivided attention, right? So this is, I know this is happening in many houses today. I've seen it myself, and let's not fall victims to these bad habits. The cell phone is there; it will not go anywhere. The WhatsApp is there. We can always plan our day and plan it in a way where we don't compromise on what is more valuable to us. So this is about the environment and about the behavior of the adults in the child's environment. We have to have a loving atmosphere. Now, in today's time, when we are much strapped for time, we are struggling for time. People ask me, how do I, not hurry up? How do I, pace it out, or have peace at home? So we have to put something in the center. We have to have some principle, and we have to stick to it, come what may. So there were times when one would ask, "Dharma kya kehta hai?" But today, at least, can I ask, what is my principle? So every year, can I revisit my principle and can I stick to it? So we need to derive something of a higher order, and that will help us. It could be my connection with God. It could be a principle that I'm holding sacred. For example, truthfulness or timeliness, whatever it is, whatever you vibrate with. So have certain principle and put it in the center of your life, and go by it. Don't just go with the flow. Life is not about going with the flow. And life is leading it in the right way. Yeah, and becoming a positive contributor in the society, and similarly becoming a positive contributor in your child's life. By doing this act, am I contributing positively, is a question you can ask. It's a simple question. You can ask this question. So there are many ways in which you can you can see for yourself if you are contributing positively in your child's life. So this is about the environment, yeah, and the role of the mother in the child's life. Coming to the education part of it, so there is no formal education for the child in this duration time period, because the Annamaya Kosha is forming. The brain has not yet fully formed. Yeah, these are formative years for the child. The internal organs are developing, and whatever the child is eating, the child is eating, and it is getting converted into energy. Yeah, and energy is finite, and formal education takes up the brain's processing time. Brain starts processing this information, so, and takes up this energy. So therefore, till the brain is fully developed, there is no formal education that this child should receive, and therefore the child would learn anything that is there in the environment, which is informal. Yeah, there was informal education. The child is, remember, self-driven. He is learning many things on his own. So there is nothing which is coming from outside at this stage. And what happens if we start educating the child formally much earlier on, like what's happening today? Yeah, so the child is being sent to a play school, and then KG classes, kindergarten classes start, and then the child is taught ABC 1, 2, 3, and everything is happening earlier on. So the brain processing starts, and we are taking away. Remember, energy is finite. We are taking away energy which is meant for the development of the internal organs, the brain, and then we are taxing the brain and asking it to process this information. So we are creating so much damage. So the internal organs may not be fully developed. Yeah, the brain may have damages. We are seeing the trend. We have pulled adulthood earlier on. There's early puberty. There are diseases of adults appearing in children. There is hyperactivity. There is attention deficit disorders. There are a whole host of problems that children have to deal with, and the parents too. And we are the cause. Yeah. So we have to realize this, and we have to have course correction measures here. And what makes sense, we have to go with what makes sense, and not with what is the trend. Yeah. So don't follow the herd. We follow what makes sense. So what makes sense is that the child is with the mother. Remember, the child was in the womb with the mother, and slowly the child has come out, and but it's not fully independent right now. It wants the security of the mother, the warmth of the mother, the love of the family members. It looks for that security. So the moment the child goes out and formal education has started, the child is thrown into a very strange atmosphere. Yeah, and the child suddenly withdraws. There are fears that set into the child. So therefore, there no formal education for the child. Therefore, at Vidyakshetra, we didn't have a Shishuvatika to begin with, because we believed in this principle that the child must stay at home with the mother or with the family. But there has been, constant demands that, otherwise we'll be forced to send the child to another school. So why don't you start a Shishuvatika? So we have a Shishuvatika in Vidyakshetra, wherein the teachers are motherly. It's a homely atmosphere that has to be created. The child has to be offered a large space to play, and there has to be outdoor play, indoor play. There has to be a rhythm followed, and the child has to go with this rhythm. We have created something called the daily rhythm for the child, wherein the child's energies are conserved in some activities and are expended in some activities. So conserving, expending. So like this, there is a rhythm, daily rhythm of activities. And then there is activities in the sense, there's sand play, there's indoor play, there is a storytelling session, there is the fruit time, there is the lunch time. And then there are some activities wherein, because the Annamaya Kosha is developing, so we have to work on the physical body of the child. So there could be activities like nothing structured, unstructured games, and unstructured activities like beading, which develops the gross motor skills or the fine motor skills. So we have in and out stitching, and everybody sits, all the children sit together. The teacher is singing a beautiful song, and then it's like a homely atmosphere. And then one of the days, there's the weekly rhythm. Some days the teacher says, let's all cook together, and the children say, we'll cook a salad. So everybody bring, a tomato, a cucumber, and everybody puts them together. They chop, they make a bowl of salad. So there's cooking. Some days there's painting. The child has to have lots of colors. So there's painting, and there is sometimes there is a Prakriti Parichay. So they go out in nature, and where we stay there is 350 acres of reserve forest, and it's very green. So naturally there are insects, there are birds, bees, small animals. So the children go out in nature, and they have to, go on a particular path every day. And by doing so for over a period of time, they get to know that there are different seasons. There are different colors in nature. There are flowering trees, there are fruit trees, there are insects, there are bees. They get closer to the nature. So we also have to bring them closer to the nature. Once they become so close to the nature, then they will stop exploiting it, later in their adulthood. So we have to uh, give them exposure to these principles. And then the Pancha Mahabhutas, we need to help them experience what is water. Yeah, they play with water, and when it rains, they go out and they do chup chup. And so I ask some of the parents, say, is it okay to allow my child to uh, get wet in rain? So, is it a question out of concern for the child, or is it because the child's clothes will get dirty and it becomes inconvenient to you? Where are you coming from? So don't worry at all. Let the child experience all these things. Let the child experience rain. Let the child fall down by climbing a tree. So create a lot of games for the child. So we create a lot of options for the child. So what are the options for the child? I said no should not become a samskriti for the child. So one of the ways is to fill the child's life with possibilities. So I give some examples like when you're busy working in the kitchen, so let the child come into the kitchen space and let it give it a small kitchen of the child's own kitchen. Small, give it a vegetable. You're cutting vegetable, the child also is cutting some vegetable. Use it in the next meal, say for instance. And this way the child feels productive, or the child feels wanted, and the child is feeling joy. Mm. So include it, be inclusive, and have a wall for the child. Let it draw, let it paint, let it do whatever it wants on that wall. And create an obstacle course. The child can jump onto the chair, onto the table, onto the other chair, and onto the ground, and onto the grill. So create an obstacle course for the child. You do, today in a nuclear family, we joke that if the husband and wife stay together, that's a joint family. So in this situation, who will play with the child? Especially if it's a single child, then the parents have to become the friends of the child. So you play with the child. You play rolling games with the child. Who will touch mama first? Who will walk backwards from here to there? There are so many games that you can create. Who will walk like a butterfly? Who will fly like a bee? Who will swim like a dolphin? So there are many games that you can create. So become creative, and give your child, remember to give the child a happy childhood experience. So this is the crux of early childhood, and we all can contribute, positively, as I said, as parents, as teachers, as well wishers of future society, which will be a vibrant society created by these children. And therefore, in early childhood, our focus is to create a happy child. So there's a thing about media. This is not spoken about in the Taittiriya Upanishad, but of late there's a lot of research which has happened on media and its ill effects on young children, especially in the early childhood. If the child is exposed to media, remember, media is a lot of frames of pictures which are moving fast, and that when it moves fast, there's a certain processing that the brain has to do, and this processing takes away the energy of the child, and therefore the children, a lot of hormones are then released, like dopamine or adrenaline, and these are hormones which create hyperactive children, and therefore we are creating a breed of children who are hyperactive, who have very little attention span because of over exposure to media very early on. And recently, in the newspaper, there was an article on media and mental health of the child. In adults, there are diseases, mental disorders, which are coming to light because of overexposure to media. Therefore, please, we have a policy at Vidyakshetra that we have very little tolerance for media for small children, and we do not encourage children having cell phones or being exposed to TV. So reduce this. Do anything that you have to reduce it organically. Don't stop it suddenly. Bring it to minimum and then reduce it completely. So this is about media. No media. Thank you.